This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people, about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Mallonee, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Welcome to the Heroic Voice. I'm your host, Dennis Mallonee. This is where we talk about comic books, comic book creators, affiliated stuff, things like that. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps us out. And if you could share this link with your friends, bring them on board. We want to get as many people as possible looking at this because I think we're doing some pretty good stuff. Today's guest is back with us, Greg Elkins, the owner of Tiger Paw Press, produces gaming material principally for Champion 6. We have a joint venture with Tiger Paw Press. The thing behind me there, is the cover for our League of Champions Sourcebook. Our next project is a League of Enemies Sourcebook, and that is specifically what I want to talk to Greg about today. I want to get Greg Elkins' take on the sequencing that we're doing here and what he thinks of the enemies. This is, in fact, the first time we've ever devoted a podcast to discussing a heroic publishing product. It is a joint venture with Tiger Paw Press, so it's not exclusively heroic. So we are doing something for Greg as well. But I thought it was time. Let people know that there is stuff coming from heroic publishing, and there has been for a while. Greg, hi, it's good to see you again.
Hey, how you been?
I've been okay. It's been what, like maybe a month and a half since the last time we spoke?
Like that, yeah. Well,
And
other than emails.
yeah, well, your first podcast is up on our YouTube channel, on the Heroic Voice YouTube channel. And I would refer people to that. We should probably get a link to it up here, and I'll let my producer handle that when it's editing time. But let me get your take on this. When we discussed the projects that we might do together, the first one you actually had in mind was not the League of Champions Sourcebook and not the League of Enemies Sourcebook. It was a different one. I'm not going to tell people what it is yet because I want to say that for a surprise. But do you remember why, in particular, we decided to do it in that sequence with the Champions book first and the Enemies book following it up?
Well, I brought up the people we're not talking about at the moment, and then you brought up League of Enemies, and we started working on it. And then I realized I had put out something using the League of Champions, but it was out for a while. And for lack of a better term, I was working with old information. So I thought it'd be better to reintroduce the champions up to date, all their members, and then bring in the enemies that they combat in the comics. And then people could also use them in play sessions to battle the League of Champions if players are playing them
Or their own heroes. I mean, the League of Enemies is useful for fighting any
yeah.
group of player characters.
And the fun concept is if your players are playing the League of Champions, you can kind of recreate some of the battles that you've had in your comic book and see if their outcome is the same as your outcome.
Not likely to be. It
Not
never
like
is.
I
Everyone
have
makes
found
different
players
decisions.
come up with things you just don't think about.
Oh yeah, I remember Steve Perrin talking about that. Right, he actually had a game that he would run, a standard thing, and he was telling me the result was never the same. Right, the player characters, in the different times he ran that scenario, never made the same decisions.
Well, I've always found when I'm working up adventures, and I think, okay, it's going to go this way. I don't think I've ever had an adventure go the way I planned it to go. It always gets sidetracked somewhere.
Which is part of the fun of
Yeah,
gaming with different people with different approaches, different takes on things. And that's going to be the case with this book as well as with the Champions book. I mean, even if you're running the G Girl or the Huntsman or iStar, you're not going to run her the same way that you know I write them when I write them in the comic books, because my take on the characters isn't going to be exactly the same as other people's takes.
right.
Yeah. So enemies, right? We were talking about this pretty early on when we were doing the book, and I don't remember if I clued you in on it or you picked it up, but the League of Enemies is not what it appears to be. Um, it's something a little bit different than just a group of villains who got together to fight the good guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
discovered that as you started sending me more and more information.
mhm. So give me your reaction to that and tell people about it, because I mean, I could, say what it is, but I'd really like to get your feel for, given what the League of Enemies actually is, how might people use them in their campaign?
Well, okay, they're the bad guys, but I don't, all the group don't realize it, but they're actually working for the government, even if they don't know it.
Mhm.
And now Madam Sin, the leader, knows it, but she's kept that information from other members of the group.
Esper
So,
knows it. Esper knows it as well.
yeah, okay, I forgot about it. Yeah, but the rest of them are pretty much in the dark. And from a GM's standpoint, that means, yeah, you can go have them rob a bank, but you can also have them do things that would benefit the government from testing new equipment, from uh, they may have found out that Russia has some prototype they would like, and they could send them after that.
Mhm.
Demon or Viper or any criminal organization, information get back to the federal government about what they're planning, and that you could use the League of Enemies to go after whatever they're doing or try to stop them, which could bring the heroes in because you got these guys that are basically known as villains to the public breaking into some building. Now they got to go stop them, not knowing why they went into the building in the first place.
Let's
So,
get a little more subtlety here. I mean, it's not just that they're working for the federal government, they're working for a specific agency of the
yeah,
federal government that may in fact be bad guys, right? We don't know necessarily that this dark ops operation is actually sanctioned by the US government.
yeah, and see that also gives the GM another tool because they could be the good guys working, the good guy agency in the government, or they could be a bad guy agency with its own nefarious little plan that the rest of the government doesn't know. It would depend what the GM wants to do with their campaign, and it's a perfect tool really for either way they want to go in that route. And
Mhm.
that brings in the heroes and that brings in other villains as well. So it's just a great tool as a GM for you to sit down when you're working up adventure. You got this group that you can do almost anything with.
And that was my concept from the beginning when I first decided that there would be a League of Enemies. My thought was, wait a second here. Madam Sin, right, from the beginning was not what she appeared to be. Right. So the question would be, to my mind, why would Madam Sin organize a League of Enemies if she is not actually as villainous as she appears to be? Right. So, and that's where the notion that, that agency that she works for would ask her, because they can't rely on heroes to do things that heroes would not really be willing to do, where they could rely on some villains who don't necessarily know why they're doing it to go and steal stuff.
Right.
Right.
Or to go
Now,
in and, then you go back, you have some hero team, be it the champions or player character super team that has stopped this nefarious uh, little adventure over here, and they have this prototype that they're holding for the government. Well, that'd be a perfect thing for the League of Enemies to go collect.
mhm.
So that'd be another way you could then get the enemy League of Enemies fighting the players.
So let's talk about the enemies in general and then talk about the specific members of it. The League of Enemies was brought together kind of as a counter to the champions. They mirror them in some ways, they don't mirror them in others. You know, some of the people in the League of Enemies kind of combine some aspects of the champions. They've got a big strong guy in Ogre. They've got a dashing debonair showman in the Red Rapier. They've got a couple of energy projectors in Radar and Sonar. They have a mentalist in Esper. They have a magic wielding demonic fire projector in Demon Fire. And their leader, Madam Sin, is a technical genius and a good leader. Now,
And
so
they have two other very unique members compared to the
sort
others.
of sort of members.
Yeah. And but they're very unique and very different from the rest of them, and that's kind of another neat little aspect of it.
Yeah, we're offering up a couple of people who were not officially members of the League of Champions in the comic books, but they did have some connection with them, and you can include them in your campaign if you want to. They're the awesome Eraserhead and Brother Basilisk.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing I really like about this group is it reminds me of back when I started playing Champions, because the members of the league are, characters that've been around for a long time, but nobody other than, in the comics, but I mean, nobody seems to want to do anything with them as far as modules or anything like that. But they're great characters.
I think so. And anybody who's in the gaming or toy business who happens to be listening to this, get in touch with us because we would very much like to license some things out into other media. You know, check our website, check our contact information. If any of you out there know anybody who's interested in doing toys and gaming and things like that, by all means, put them in touch with us. We'd love to talk to them. So let's talk about Madam Sin. Madam Sin has a history that very much predates the League of Enemies. She started out, with, I don't know how much I want to get into this, but she's like the younger sister of a scientist who is really into artificial intelligence, the character who appeared in our Eternity Smith series. And there's that sibling rivalry, right? And she did not want to, even though her sister offered her a job at the company that she was running, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go do my own thing. She was contacted by this shadowy government agency that may or may not be the good guys. And they asked her what she would like to do. And she's like, I like to build things. I like to build gadgets. I'm into tech, stuff like that. And they said, well, okay, we need to give you a way to test them. And what did they do?
Put together a League of Enemies, test them.
No. Come on.
Well, she went after the League of Champions. Well,
She went after iStar.
she's very.
Right. What she actually did was they gave her a bunch of thugs and told her to pose as a criminal mastermind and give the thugs gadgets to test. Right. So and they also assured her that, wherever they stole something, right, the people that they stole it from would be reimbursed in some way. Right. So it basically gave her free reign to, send her people out there with stuff that she wanted them to test in situations, where they were dealing with, local authorities and people like that. Then iStar showed up on the scene. Okay.
Became a little bit infatuated with him.
Yeah. And yeah, he was dashing, he was debonair, he was handsome, and she might have just shifted her base of operations to somewhere else, but she wanted to find out more about him. And that's how Madam Sin sort of became an arch nemesis of iStar. So can you add anything to that? We've talked about this. I mean, the official iStar fan club came out of this.
Yeah, she started that. I know in the comic book, and we touched about it a little bit in her background. She actually ends up pregnant.
Yeah.
Has a child that is iStar's.
and is a super genius herself.
Yeah, so there is a romantic dynamic between the two. So that that always adds fun when you're in combat if you're fighting the guy you like. But it's just another dynamic that adds when the members of the champions meet members of the League of Enemies.
Well, one thing I don't know if we mentioned this, we should mention this if we didn't in the source book, is that I started being completely oblivious and self-absorbed, never figured out that his girlfriend Cynthia was in fact Madam Sin.
I
Right?
have to go back and look. I don't think we did.
We should. I mean, he never figured it out. He never put two and two together until after Honey, the daughter, was born. And then that's when she finally clued him in on it. But now Esper. Esper's a mentalist. She's a Russian. She got her telepathic abilities from exposure to some sort of alien intelligence, right? And this backstory is in there. We've never actually printed it in the comic books, but it is in the source book. As with the enemies book, the source book as with the champions book, rather, the source book for the enemies will contain background information that's never actually been revealed in the comic books, which is another reason to buy the thing.
Mhm.
Given that, well, let's talk about this. Esper and the Huntsman sort of have a thing as well, just like Istar and Madam Sin. With the Huntsman, it was never serious, but it was on a mission into Eastern Europe that Esper encountered the Huntsman and basically asked him if he would be willing to take her along with him. She wanted to defect from Russia. And that's how she got to the United States. She started working for that secret government agency. And when the Madam Sin project got underway, they figured that Cynthia would need someone to help her keep these thugs they were giving her in line. And Esper served that purpose. Right? Esper, being a mentalist, can sort of subtly, push these thugs, to enhance whatever loyalty they may have to the criminal mastermind that they were working for. So, your take. There's a relationship there between Sin and Esper.
Yeah, they seem to be very close. She's not the most. I think one of the reasons I like her. She's not the most powerful mentalist out there,
Not at all.
but she has just the right amount of power and knows how to use it the right way that it works out perfectly for the plans of Madame Sin.
Right. She's also got some degree of sex appeal.
Yeah,
She's a
but
very, very sexy woman.
yeah, and it works out very well, because it's useful to have a mentalist in your group, but you don't want it so overpowering that why do we have the rest of the group? We just got her. What more do we need? And it works out perfectly with the way that she's been in the comics and the way we tried to work her up for the game. That she's just the right level to do exactly what the League of Enemies needs her for.
She's useful without being overpowering.
Yeah, and it's just a good dynamic between those two because Madam Sin's in charge, and Esper's just the right level and the right person to make sure her plan goes the way, hopefully, that Madam Sin wants it to go. And so I mean, and I've always liked her, from back in the day because she's been around a long time.
Mhm.
And
In one
even
form or another. This Esper is not the same
not the
as
same, but still, I mean, the character itself has been around, and even if you look back in the day, she wasn't the most powerful one back then either, but she was very effective. And looking at the stats compared to the others in the group, she's very effective and perfect for what they need her for.
all righty. The third member of this group was the dashing red rapier. And you can tell me, I think, about that.
I,
What's your take on that character?
I remember when Enemies 3 came out and I saw him and it just made me giggle because he's right out of a swashbuckling movie. I mean, the way he acts, the way he dresses, everything, even right, yes, he has a rapier, but I mean, even without that, it's just his attitude. the way he dresses, the way he acts, he's right out of a movie. And that's actually how he got his start.
He
You know,
was
he
a movie stuntman. The character was created by Heroic Publishing's vice president, David Berg, who's also, in fact, the producer of these podcasts. So there was no way I was not going to include the Red Rapier in this League of Enemies because, I mean, he's just a great character.
yeah. And I will admit, I came up with one little subtle power to give him, and you guys agreed. So I thought that kind of finished him off real good because
Remind me what that was?
uh, his what I call it, the shocking finale.
Ah,
He had the rapier, but it was just a rapier, and I gave it a little You know, he can't use it a whole lot, but it's always there. You never know. You may need that
a
little finale
little
in
a
the
little
way.
electric charge that he can channel
Yeah,
through that thing.
you may need that when when things are down and you got to get that guy off you so you can get away. So I thought that really set it, finished him off real well. But
The
he's
Red Rapier's motivations, and this, he was a movie stuntman, right? Became, a featured actor in a couple of movies. And then iStar showed up on the scene, and iStar was getting all of this press, and the Red Rapier got jealous. So he decided that, he didn't have any superpowers. Red Rapier didn't have any superpowers. He could still do things, right? These guys with superpowers, right? He would go show them up. Yeah,
he has a couple times, so he's living the good life.
yeah, he is.
But he's a fun character because I mean, if nothing else, he can add a little bit of comic relief to the battle because he's jumping around doing flips and calling people names and whatnot, and it's just a fun character.
He's also a very charming fellow, right? If there are any girls in the superhero group, cute. Okay, I'll go after her. Right?
He might be better with the ladies in his mind than in actuality, but you always got to try.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, we're going to put up images of these characters in the editing process, but I want to show you because this is a Beecham piece. This is in fact Esper, right? When I said that she's a very sexy woman, right? Oh yeah, absolutely. Particularly when Mark Beecham draws her. And that should be in color by the time this gets to the editing phase. Mark has the black and white piece. He also has a few other pieces that we're going to be including in the book. There's going to be a lot of Beecham art in this
I don't
one.
remember who drew it, but there's a very nice picture of Madame Sin too.
Yes, that one actually is in color. I don't have it with me at the moment, but we
Yeah.
will put it up for people to see. He also did an ogre
Yeah.
piece where the ogre is facing off against the G-girl in that piece, which we will be having the volume, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Don't want to talk about ogre yet. Um, when the call came from that agency from Madam Sin to organize a League of Enemies that they could work with, she had Esper, she had Red Rapier, she needed other people. So what did she do?
Brought in a couple siblings.
Well, go back a step, right? This is the sort of a prototypical League of Enemies, a group of villains who are working for Dr. Destroyer and Professor Muerte, right? That included Ogre, Radar, Sonar, and the Green Dragon, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
originally, but he didn't make
So Madam Sin knew about the existence of that group and knew that they had stopped working for Muerte and Demonic and figured if they were at loose ends, they might be willing to be hired for her project. So she sent Esper out to see if they might be recruited. Um, this is actually a story that appears in an issue of Champions Adventures. I think it's issue 15. Dave put that cover up there so people can see it. People can actually read that origin story. It's there. It's out there. Do you remember which ones? Was it the twins that she recruited first? Radar and Sonar?
I'm not positive, but I was thinking it was Ogre first, but I
Was it
could.
Ogre first? Then we didn't get too far ahead of ourselves. So Esper actually went out to find Ogre to try to recruit him, figuring that he might easily be recruited. He's probably doesn't seem to be all that smart. Um,
Not
and
a strong suit.
not his strong suit. He's really strong. And if he's any kind of man at all, he'll probably be interested in her. So it should be easy. But she found out something when she went to recruit him, something that people just don't know about the ogre.
Yes. There's more to him than meets the eye. I mean, yes, he's big and strong, but sometimes he's not himself, if you will, because I never pronounced the last name correctly. I always want to say pomegranate.
That's correct, pomegranate.
I've been corrected on that a couple of times with other people, but Pammy Pomegranate can, let's just say, take control of Ogre if she needs to.
Yeah,
And
there's a link, a psychic link between.
and luckily for Esper, she was able to do that because he's known to get carried away.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
so, and that's another neat dynamic in the game that in the comics and could be in the game because 1 minute you got this huge monster that can
Who's not really as stupid as people think he is.
yeah and can but he can I mean he can bring down a building if he wanted and all of a sudden he can just stop and almost be somebody else and you don't see that a lot in comic books and you definitely don't see it in the game very much but it can add a neat aspect and a neat weapon for the GM to use in combat because I mean you could be fighting the guy and then all of a sudden he just stops and starts talking to you like you're his best friend or something and that's going to confuse people.
Oh yeah, it has confused some people in the comic books too.
But I
It's
mean
a closely guarded secret. I mean, Pamela does not want people to know that she has
that link.
that link. I mean, some people know it. It's not something you can keep hidden, but she wants to keep it as tight as possible. And when Esper first found Ogre, he was actually loading equipment into a laboratory, right? Which made her take it. So what the heck's going on here? Why would a brainless monster be bringing scientific equipment into a lab setup?
Turned out there was a reason.
Yeah. Um,
And
and part of the deal, the way they recruited Ogre was to promise Pamela, right, who is in fact the not evil niece of the notorious, Dr. Damien Pomegranate, that they would equip a lab for her. And she said, okay, that's cool. I could go for that. All right, I'll help you with keep Ogre under control. But it's just, leave it
it's
at
a
that.
very neat situation. And like I said, it can get when you're running a venture, you need all the tools you can get, and that's just another tool that can be there for a GM if he needs it.
Yeah. Okay. The abominable ogre we have talked about. Let's talk about the Japanese energy twins, Radar and Sonar.
Okay.
Radar being the guy, Sonar being the girl. Unless I
And
have it backwards, which I don't think I do.
no, you're all right. But I mean, from a champion's point of view, they've been around since first edition.
A version of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
Again, these are not the same characters that.
but I mean, people kind of have an idea of them, and it's again characters that never got really used for anything.
Mhm.
They're always there. They're always a neat concept, and nobody seemed to do anything with them until you guys started doing the comics. And granted, like you said, it's not the same people or the same character, but still, somebody's finally doing something with them.
Okay, we want to keep this close, so let's go through this, or not close. We want to keep this within our 30-minute or so thing. So let's go quickly through Radar and Sonar, then we can talk about Demon Fire. And we may not have time for Basilisk and Eraserhead, but Radar and Sonar are twins, Japanese twins that are devoted to each other. My thought all along was that they would be like the Japanese equivalent of the same kind of project that created Flare and Sparkplug, and their siblings. I don't know because I haven't decided what actually happened to that project, but Radar and Sonar, I don't think the project exists anymore, but Radar and Sonar do, right?
Yeah.
They are extremely devoted to each other. And where one goes, the other goes. So Madam Sin thought she needed some energy projectors to balance off like Flare and Sparkplug, and she knew about them, so she sent Esper to recruit them. Esper didn't have much trouble with them. Um, they were willing to do it as long as they got paid. That was the important thing for them. Give us money, we'll do it. Yeah.
They're mercenaries. As long as you pay them, and I would say treat them correctly, you're going
Treating them correctly, yes.
to have loyal people.
Particularly treating sonar correctly, right? Because radar is a stone cold killer.
Yeah, and he's very protective of his sister.
Yep.
So you treat her badly, you now have two people after you immediately. And some people have found that out the hard way.
Yeah. In particular, we may note that the Green Dragon was not recruited by Madam Sin, and there is a reason that he was not recruited by Madam Sin.
Yes. Yeah, but they can see that in the book.
Okay. All righty. We don't know too much else about them. They've only appeared briefly, and maybe that's a good angle for the GM to do some character development with those characters in the book, because they really are to some extent ciphers. Um, all we know about them really is that background information that we just gave you.
Yeah.
Okay, she needed a mystic. She did not have a mystic. Madam Sin needed someone to do magic. She knew about a little witch girl who did occult investigations, who was based in New Orleans, sent out an inquiry to her, and was told by Arcana, the witch girl, aka the Black Enchantress, basically to piss off. Not interested in working for anybody else.
So they found somebody else.
Yeah. And that is chronologically one of the earliest references to the Black Enchantress, even though it happens much later. She looked around for somebody else with mystical powers who might have a grudge against the champions, and stumbled upon Demon Fire, who has a history with Rose.
Yeah.
And Psyche.
Little
So
fire thrower.
Fire Summoner.
Yeah.
So your take on Demon Fire?
She is I don't want to say pyromaniac, but she does like fire.
Oh yeah.
But she's kind of a wild child in some ways too, but
She's half demon.
she's half demon, but I mean, she likes to do some crazy things from time to time, and she does like fire, so that makes a very powerful combination.
Particularly for a GM who's looking for something to give the heroes trouble with.
Yeah, she'll do that for sure.
Absolutely. She has a grudge against Rose. She has a crush on Ice Star.
Well, he has a
And
lot of
Ogre
people.
is interested in her. Ogre is interested in Demon Fire.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Isar has quite a following.
Well, Ice Star is a very attractive fellow. He's, brash, he's bold, he's dynamic. The trouble with him is that he's self-absorbed and doesn't really pay any attention to anything that isn't of immediate interest to him. That's one of his character flaws.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty much all of the people that we have coming out in the book for the enemies group, except for Eraserhead and Brother Basilisk, who are being presented as sort of kind of members of the League of Enemies in this volume.
And very unique.
As Eraserhead tried, in the comics, Eraserhead tried to join the group, and Madam Sin gave him an assignment to prove himself. He sent him after Icicle.
Yeah, didn't turn out well.
Didn't turn out well for Eraserhead. The reason is she was pissed with Icicle because Icicle had basically beat up the entire League of Enemies just a little bit earlier. They completely underestimated Icicle. Icicle is a lot more powerful than people realize, even more powerful than she realizes. And she just mowed the League of Enemies down one after the other because they didn't actually know what she was capable of doing. And she was panicked. She was scared, right? The adrenaline rushing. And Madam Sin said, okay, I got to deal with her. He sent that Eraserhead out, figuring if Icicle wins, I don't have to worry about Eraserhead. If Eraserhead wins, then I've got a good gauge of what Icicle's powers actually are. So the upshot of the story is that Icicle basically fried him. Um, and and the comic books, he's currently sort of somewhere in the eraser dimension, right? In the books, the GM can assume that that never happened, or he can assume he came back somehow. But Eraserhead is a character with some very peculiar powers, which I would like you quickly to describe.
I don't know how you came up with this, but he can erase things, literally. I mean, he has a big eraser on his head. He can erase a hole in the wall. He can erase air, which allows him to fly, which is just funny and like I said, very unique. He can erase people's limbs. They do eventually come back, but it's just again, it's a very unique character, and it can add a little bit of comic relief at the same time, which is always good in the middle of a very intense fight.
Two sources for this: an old Daffy Duck cartoon,
Okay.
it was a Dick Tracy riff, Duck Tracy, and one of the villains in that was Eraserhead with the tagline, "I'm gonna rub you out."
That's too
So
good.
that was the original source for it. And when I was thinking about it, I remembered there was an old Giant Man story, like his second appearance or so, with the living eraser, who actually used his hands to, send people to his home dimension. He was from another dimension. It looked like they were being erased.
Oh, okay.
So there were two sources kind of for that. But
Okay.
I think the combination really works.
Yes, he's very unique. And
Then there's
as
Brother Basilisk.
then there's Brother Basilisk, which if somebody plays fantasy games, they kind of have an idea what his power is just by his name. And they're right, he can turn people to statues. But he's a villain without being a villain. I mean, people were mean to him and he learned that he could do this, but to him, he's collecting art. He turns people into statues. That's his art. So he's
Mhm.
collecting art. So he's not your typical bad guy, as in he's not purposely going out, I don't, I'm gonna go make this person a statue. It's not really like that. But I mean, he does turn them into statues, but it's just people that have upset him and and that nature. And then to him it's all art anyway. It's not a vicious attack. It's just you're my art now.
Yeah. And his first encounter with a member of the League of Champions was again with Rose, right? She's an occult detective. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police asked her to come up and investigate this strange situation of people being turned into stone, right? And that's how she encountered Brother Basilisk.
And she ended up being a little stiff for a while as
She
well.
did. And then she teamed up with Flair and they tracked him down and, his power got reversed on him and he became stone for a while. So your suggestion was that Madam Sin might recruit him for some specific job.
Yeah, for a specific job because like I said, he's a villain without being one, but he could be very useful for certain things that she's wanting done. I mean, if I'm wanting to go into that building to get the prototype and there's two guards standing guard, and you can go over there and
Stone him for a little while.
for a little bit, I can get in that building really easy.
Mhm.
And you've
Okay.
done your piece of art.
We are running out of time, and I think that wraps it up. Let me recommend that people look on the website at heroicmultiverse.com for information about when the book is coming up. Tiger Paw Press website, and we'll have some information on it as well. You can, okay, sorry about that. We lost our feed with Greg there right as we were ending it, but we covered all the topics so we wanted to, so that's cool. Again, if you want to keep track of what's going on with the Enemy Sourcebook and look at other product, both from Heroic Publishing and Tiger Paw Press, please by all means visit the Heroic Publishing website, www.heroicmultiverse.com, and visit the Tiger Paw Press page on Facebook, YouTube. Just take a look, find Tiger Paw Press. Great stuff is up there, and it's good stuff. It is. It is. So I guess that's about it. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share the channel with other people. And we will be back next week, we hope, with an interview with Del Barris, one of the legendary Filipino artists who came out of the late Bronze Age into the early Silver Age. So anyway, everybody have a good evening. Thanks. We'll see you next time.